Good morning. My name is Mark Lewis. It's July 6th, 2025, and we are the San Juan Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Today's program is humble. First of all, we're going to commemorate the ending of pride a little bit. And I'm going to try and segue that into how that meshes with our Universalist heritage. To begin with, some people think it's that tolerance of people in same-sex relationships. But, okay, the Reverend Allen, who's the UU Church in Portland, Maine, had done some research. It turns out that there used to be two reverends living at that same parish. The Reverend Samuel Johnson, who wrote quite a few hymns, including one that's in our current singing the living tradition, whose life and love, his philosophy, and his lifelong commitment was to the widening of freedom's sacred sway, and how they have become touchstones of our tradition. He had a lifelong commitment to freedom, all its forms. And Reverend Allen, he found Reverend Samuel Johnson by researching another reverend. His name was Samuel Longfellow. They both had a very interesting history. The Sams, as they were known, had met while they were at Harvard studying divinity in 1842. And they spent the next 4 decades as life partners. They had shared lots of letters, as people did in those days. And the letters were a joyous round of theological musings and playful sparring, deep affection. And contemporaries at the time described their relationship as closer than the biblical David and Jonathan, who you may remember had entered into a marriage-like covenant. The Sam's ministry spanned through a lot of challenges. They were there during abolition. They were there during the Civil War. They were there during Reconstruction. And all through this, they also championed something else. Women's suffrage, which in the 1840s and 50s was not necessarily popular. It's important to share that the simple truth of their love didn't have the benefits of freedom's sacred way. There was no legal standing. In fact, there was probably some illegal things. And in the service he did, recognizing these two ministers, Reverend Allen invited children and adults to shout out the names of things they love, of activities they love, of people they love. And at this time, he also shouted out the name of his life partner, and acknowledged that there are places today and times in our history when speaking the name of a beloved was not so safe. The love that they brought together in their partnership ripples through our lives today because they champion things of inclusion, of living the fuller lives, and considering the beauty of their transcendentalist world, its survival. And I'm going to segue into a little bit more of universalism. We don't often mention that Unitarians, we talk about them a lot. We don't often mention universalists. And this was inspired by a minister named Scott Alexander. Inspired, and I sold. It's called Answering the Religious Right with Art of Universal. As must be obvious to everyone, these are the times of great tension and conflict. Much of this turmoil in our nation is focused on what some have called the cultural wars. The very vocal and visible battles that are occurring on many fronts to determine whose beliefs and whose values and principles will, perspectives will govern our world. And over the past decades, religious and cultural conservatives have waged a fierce battle against what they perceive to be the evils of liberalism. There's a whole litany of things that they don't like. Fundamentalist Christians and others are passionately convinced that there has been a dangerous erosion of old standards of life, a dangerous shift away from the assumptions and ideas that they believe built and sustained the nation. The intellectual and spiritual battle lines have been on, and the struggles underway between competing ideas and values, between competing visions of what American society is going to look like or feel like throughout this century. And it's crucial that we, as Unitarian Universalists, do not sit on the sidelines of these culture wars. We must speak up and stand up for our values and beliefs. Speak up and stand up for the principles that gives our religion its large heart and its enduring. The cultural and religious struggle we're in may seem like a brand new thing, but it isn't. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. 200 years ago, Universalism arose just the same kind of time. American Universalism, like its spiritual sister, American Unitarianism, began as a radical and optimistic Christian heresy. I love that term. I love being called a heretic. Thank you very much. In response to the grim doctrines of 18th century Calvinist Puritan. Talk about the late 18th century, 1790. The story of how Universalism took hold can be almost best described by contrasting two different points of view espoused in the States. And they are the messages of the two greatest preachers of their day, Jonathan Edwards, Hosea Ballou. Now, Jonathan Edwards was a Puritan person. He was one of the most renowned preachers of what was called the Great Awakening, which was an early version of the Christian kind that we've seen in more recent years. Apparently, he was an athletic and pretty charismatic person, and he had power and predilection during his preaching to bring the whole congregation to fearful wailing, I can't say that word, and describe the misery and damnation they deserved and would receive in hell from an angry God. Sometimes in the pulpit, he would rip off his robes and tear his shirt in self-abasing frenzy. Here's a portion of this. I love this. I had to include this. It's a portion of one of his sermons. Mind you, the late 1700s is pretty flowery, but it's fun. He said, the title of this sermon was Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Sounds close. The world of misery, the lake of burning brimstone, is extended abroad on me. Those gaping mouth is wide open, and you have nothing to stand upon or take hold of. It is the only power and pure pleasure of God that holds up. The God over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or other loathsome insect over the fire. He abhors you. You have offended him. O sinner, you hang by a slender thread, and the flames of divine wrath flashing about, and ready every moment to singe and thunder. You have nothing to lay hold of save yourself. There's nothing that you have ever done, nothing that you can do to induce God to spare you for one moment. And if I had to listen to it every Sunday, I think I would go into no. On another happy occasion, Edwards told the browbeaten folks in the pews that whenever God catches scent of humanity, The human smell is so foul and putrid, it causes God to flare his nostrils in disgust. Cheerful stuff, this 18th century miracle. But that was the substance and soul of the predominant Calvinistic theology at the time. God was a distant, angry, and stern judge. Humanity had fallen in sin. And most men and women and children are doomed to the hell of eternal damnation and misery for all their weaknesses and wickedness. It was during this kind of dark and gloomy time that a new wind began to blow. And it was the warm breeze of Universalism, a theology of love, reconciliation, and hope. The early Universalists, in direct spiritual contradiction to Puritanism's gloomy gospel, simply proclaimed that the essential qualities of God were not wrath, disgust, and judgment, but goodness, mercy, and love. The heartfelt good news of Universalism was that by God's grace and power, all of God's children, every man, every woman, every child, regardless of station or personality, weakness or wickedness, would ultimately be saved, welcomed back by an embracing and understanding. Salvation was offered to all, to the end that, as one early Universalist said, the last sinner will be dragged kicking and cursing at the Universalist preachers proclaimed every human being to be a child of God, quite naturally possessing their divine parents' inclination towards goodness and right, and therefore unavoidably drawn toward heaven and health by God's H-E-L-T-H, by the way, by God's all-powerful and encompassing love. Universalism's lifeblood was a spiritual insistence that evil and pain that we see in our world need not be a permanent and pervasive part of the universe. Early Universalists dreamed of hope than sin-saturated Puritans, and passionately they believed in the natural inclination of God, humanity, itself, towards the good. The American people, they were hungry for something positive at this point, flocked to Universalist churches. At one time in the 1840s, Universalism was the sixth largest denomination in the United States. And the greatest Universalist theologian and teacher of the day was Hosea Ballou. Some of you have heard of him. Every bit the orator has his great awakening adversaries. Ballou used to hold large congregations spellbound as he proclaimed the gospel of universal salvation. Once, before a huge crowd in Philadelphia, he pointed to the children of the audience and expressed his horror that many of the parents present that day held prevailing Calvinistic assertion that their children were innately depraved, and that most were already doomed to eternal damnation. Lifting his hand from the Bible and pointing to the crowd, he said, "Oh, dear man, dear woman, have you no connections to the world? Are you insulated from human nature? I ask you to look at the companion of your bosom, number 1700's flowery, and look at the child of your love, and say, if you believe it probable, that these sins were originally doomed by the decree of heaven to everlasting wretchedness, and derive consolation from it." On another occasion, he was preaching in Boston, and someone threw a rock through the window. They were literally battling in those days, Puritans and the Universalists and the Unitarians. Without missing a beat, Ballou picked up the large stone and said, "This argument is solid and weighty, but it's neither reasonable. But, not all the stones in Boston, except they stop my breath, will shut my mouth." During Reverend Alexander, yes, last year at seminary, he decided to do a chapel, which is basically hold a prayer service for the faculty and students at the church, at which time he planned to expound on the pure and lovely gospel of universal human affirmation. As he was walking up toward a busy intersection, he glanced over and suddenly saw an incredibly large woman sitting on a bench waiting for us. Before he could even catch himself, a thought flashed through his head. He thought, oh dear God, look at that gross woman. She must weigh 400 pounds. How could anyone let themselves get that? And who could ever love that? And at that moment, as if it were a bolt of spiritual lightning, aimed right at him, the skinny little guy sitting next to this woman looked at her lovingly in her eyes, leaned over and gave her the most gentle kiss that this reverend had ever seen. He was shocked and stunned and ashamed. And while still reeling from the disparity between his petty and unkind reaction and judgment and the pure and simple love of universalism, a voice came to him without no words, clear enough, and said, don't you get it, you dope? Here you are, a moment given, going up the hill to preach your clever little sermon on God's love and universal salvation for every human person, and all you can do is stare at someone beside you. Someone that you determined was unworthy, unlovable. Don't you understand that in the eyes of all that is sacred and holy and true in this creation, she's as utterly lovely as human beings get? Don't you get it? If the pleasure and prerogatives of gracious and goodnesses of this creation are made for you, they are made for her too. And call yourself a universalist? He was startled and chastened. And in that moment of pure and precious spiritual revelation, he said he finally began to understand universalism in a visceral way. Deep with moments. To be a universalist, a real universalist, in more than name only, is to have a heart that seeks and sees at every human turn the natural worth and preciousness of all people, especially those who are different from himself. In an instant, he said he understood what a wild and welcoming doctrine our universalist forebears bequeathed to us. And that doctrine can be summed up in stark simplicity. There's a place set at this creation for every last man, every last woman, and every last child. A precious, safe place has been set for each and every one of us. Period. The early universalists said, pure and simple, that every human being, no matter how strange or flawed or unlovable or broken or weird they may seem, is to be protected, cherished, welcomed, and loved. Now, this is not an easy faith to have, especially I don't need to point out that there's so much violence and cruelty and degradation going on. All you need to do is open the newspaper, turn on the TV, or start doom scrolling. Manifestations of our human gravity are new. It's not an easy time to believe in the worth and redeemability of society. But universalism, you see, universalism then and now, is not a naive and foolish bluebird faith, one that cannot see human wickedness, foible, sin. It is rather a tenacious faith. Universalism is a promise to theologically hang in there with the complexities and cruelties of the human individual. It is the promise not to give up on people, but to keep struggling in our broken world for the improvement and inclusion of all, even the one that you might naturally despise, reject, or they simply refused to give up on him. They saw in humanity oneness and worth more than separateness. But everyone here has no doubt, as everyone here is probably painfully aware, many in our culture don't share that. And today there's still a struggle, a very real struggle, over the soul of our nation. Today, the religious right, who you know are very fervently vocal, fiercely organized, and frightfully well-funded, is preaching the same negative and judgmental human message that Jonathan Edwards preached 200 years ago. The theological and social message of the religious right is the exact opposite of Universalism's tenacious acceptance of every human person. Today's evangelical pundits see God as angry and punishing, and believe humanity must be divided, ripped asunder, sheep from goats, saints from sinners. They're not the least bit shy about declaring that righteous delineations must be drawn between the saved and the damned, between the right thinking and the wrong, between pure and defiled, between God's chosen religiously correct, for whom a place has been set at the table, and the devil's legions, all those others who don't see or live in the world as they do, for whom a place at creation's table in their worldview has not been set. And these vocal new Puritans are not satisfied swaying individuals to their worldview. The religious right demand that society and government be structured in ways that reflect their narrow perspectives. Surely it's clear that we ignore our modern-day Jonathan Edwards and his angry, narrow, and hateful religious vision at our own peril. I believe in all my heart that soul, this time of culture wars, we must answer religion. Universalism is sound and saving vision for the human family that can help us create a livable world. That's why we must not hide the light of our faith under some bushel of weak and mild politeness, while the Franklin Grahams of this world preach their divisive, fearful, and exclusionary poison to millions. We must boldly and unashamedly share good news of every man, every woman, and every child of this creation, be they young or old, black or white, rich or poor, yellow or brown, liberal or conservative, gay or straight, is a child of the divine. John Murray, the man who's credited with bringing universalism to America, put it this way: you possess only a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell. We must unashamedly stand up to this culture, and without arrogance or vitriol, and give voice to our just and optimistic, unashamed, universalist views, just as our forebears. We must be the brave and forthright messengers of larger hope for the whole of human family. We must not sit back complacently in that self-satisfied smugness that is so common in right-thinking religious liberals. And let the centuries-old vision for a better, kinder world die because of our sophisticated cowardice or neglect. Did it ever occur to you that the only reason so many of us think poorly of evangelists, that next to nobody who thinks or feels as do religiously ever engages in the process of public sharing with you? Unitarian Universalists are notoriously spiritually silent because we demand to think for ourselves, are respectful of human difference, and don't appreciate it when someone tries to ram their beliefs down our throats. We tend to shy away from sharing with others what it is we believe, how those beliefs help us strive to be better, kinder, larger. I know it's hard for some of us to talk back to the fundamentalists by talking up our own faith, but I passionately believe that we cannot afford such self-imposed silence in dangerous and divisive times such as these. We can wish all we want, but the truth is that Franklin Graham and the others are not going to just fade away. They are out there in the public square, on the public airwaves. And unless there are other, gentler bishops for the human family being given voice, their divisive, mean-spirited, often hateful message being the only one, and the only one belief. If we remove ourselves from the religious playing field by being too nice or polite or non-confrontational, even say what it is we believe or why it is we believe it, and try to live in accordance with it, then they will carry the day and have their way with both us and the world. That's something we can neither we nor them. So let us be kind, gentle, respectful to evangelists for that hopeful, inclusive human vision to us by Universalist forebears. The stakes are too high to make it less. It's not enough to simply speak up about universalism with our lips. We must speak it with our lives, with the deeds and doings of our hands and hearts. We must, as the African saying some of those, talk the talk and walk the walk. Let there be no illusion about it. Universalism is a tough and radical doctrine. It's hard and demanding, for it insists that we be constantly about the business of growing bigger, more inclusive, and caring hearts, setting aside our little fears as we strive to care ever more widely for our brothers and sisters. Universalism says, and against all self-protecting common sense, if there's a neighbor that needs your hand, lend one. If there's a mouth that needs fed, you share some of what you have to. If there's a family that needs a home, you build one. If there's a captive that needs release, you remove bars. If there's a mourner who needs comfort, offer your embrace. If there's a charity that needs support, write that check. If there's a stranger who needs welcome, open your home. If there's someone crying, use your fingers, gently wipe away their tears. If there's a man or woman or child anywhere in the world who needs your understanding, your compassion, your mercy, your support, and your love, you give it, and you give it unstintingly and selflessly. This is the demanding call of universalism. This is not a casual Sunday walk in the park. It's a tough doctrine on inclusion and care that constantly challenges us beyond the narrow confines of our natural selfishness and fear to ever wider circles of caring. I hope that in days ahead, we who call ourselves Unitarian will speak the generous, inclusive, affirming spirit. Speak it with our lips as we answer those who live by little divisive doctrines. And even more challenging, speak it with our lives. Speak it with so everyone across this great and troubled land begins to hear on the wind the holy and inclusive voice that the poet Carl Sandburg heard. He wrote, "There's only one horse on earth, and his name is all hooves. There's only one bird in the air, and her name is all wings. There is only one fish in the sea, and the fish's name is all fins. There's only one man in the world, and the man's name is all man. There's only one woman in the world, and all women. Only one child, and that child's name is all children." So, moving. Okay, my closing words today. Something I found online, also I liked it. Some of you. As the world likes to figure everything out, I'll hold the door. I'll be holding doors open for strangers, being kind to my neighbor, letting people cut in front of me in traffic, saying good morning, keeping babies entertained in grocery lines. That's one of mine. Stopping to talk to anyone who seems lonely, being patient with waiters and sales clerks, help the homeless, smiling at people who pass by. Why? Because I'm not willing to stand idly by and live in a world where love is invisible. Join me in showing acceptance and understanding, and in judging less. Be kind to strangers. Give grace to friends who are having a bad day. Be forgiving of yourself. Today and every day, be the change and be the light. Start today. Never stop. And our closing song is.
I think we should change it. I think we should do Samuel Johnson's hymn. It's called Life of Ages, and it's 111.
Very good.
And